The Bible promises beauty for ashes, and that God will make all things new. That takes on new meaning for some today.
The diversion of water. California has been in a battle with the Democrat Party for water. Our California growers want water. Our farmers, our dairymen want water. We have been absolutely, and I think, by the way, President Trump put an accurate comment out recently that the Democrat Party in California has starved the citizenry of the water that's provided in the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Welcome to Understanding the Times Radio with Jan Markell, Radio for the Remnant, brought to you by Olive Tree Ministries. In part one of our program, our guest host is Mark Henry, who talks to Mondo Gonzales. In part two, Ken Michael and Josh Schwartz talk to Seth Gruber to round out the hour. Here is today's programming.
How did this fire start? They never tell us. Just a few weeks ago, there was a fire nearby in Malibu. Soledad Osua, who's on the board of Golden Together, she's very convinced, and she's been on this show to talk about it, that it was a homeless encampment that started that fire. Hundreds of fires a year started because of homeless encampments that are not cleared away by the authorities right across California. Look at the leadership, if you can call it that, in Los Angeles. Mayor Karen Bass cutting the fire department's budget, just arriving back from Africa, where she was on a trip for some pointless ceremony that she's going to the inauguration of the president of Ghana, but she's not going to the inauguration of our president here. And she's stopped at the airport and she literally freezes in silence when a reporter asks her for some kind of comment. I've never seen anything like it. It's a total catastrophic failure of competent leadership here in California. Additionally, the ideology, the far left ideology that prioritizes all this other nonsense instead of practical steps to keep us safe and make our lives better.
Welcome to Understand the Times Radio. I'm Mark Henry, filling in for Jan Markell. Jan will be back with us next week. Well, in our time today, we're going to cover a number of items. We got President Trump's inauguration on Monday. What's that look like for America? What's that look like for Israel? What does that look like for our economy? Was this the hand of God to have him serve at this time in history? And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to also be looking in Revelation 17 and the 10 kings that are going to rise up and give power to the beast. We're also going to be looking at the Middle East, and we've seen Iran in these last 6 months being defanged, if you will. And what is Israel going to do next? How are they going to deal with that nuclear threat? Is that going to be brought to an end as we look into 2025? And then, of course, we're going to be talking about the fires. Think about it. Just the last couple of months, we've seen the Carolinas flood. We've seen Middle America frozen. We've seen California covered in fires. And the question is, was this ultimately brought about because of the mocking of God, as we saw in Hollywood? We'll talk about these things and many more. Our guest today is Mondo Gonzales, co-host of Prophecy Watchers. Mondo is a graduate of Moody Bible Institute and Trinity International University. If you're new to the program and you don't know Mondo, he has a master's degree in Near East archaeology and languages. Over the last 20 years, he's done extensive archaeology work in Greece and Turkey, the island of Patmos, of course, where the book of Revelation was given, Israel, Jordan, Peru, and all over Egypt. Mondo, welcome to the program.
It's awesome to be here.
That clip we just heard, Jack Hibbs and Steve Hilton were both talking about the fires in California. Both of them came to the same conclusion, and both of them emphasized through that interview it was about poor leadership and about an ideology, a worldview. And I just want to ask you the question, let's kind of break those two down. Describe to us the leadership crisis that we're facing in America.
There is no doubt that what we've seen over the past 75 years or so, that where you see, for lack of a better idea, you just liberalism, this idea of God not being the center, a movement and a departure away from a conservative framework of God and country. And that can happen on both sides, but no doubt, as we see, it's more entrenched in the progressive left. That's undeniable. And what we've been watching is over the last 2 or 3 decades, a lot of these policies, California being first and foremost, California, Oregon, and Washington. I grew up in Oregon. It's way different than when I was there as a kid. But these states have actually had the Democratic leftist leadership to implement some of these policies. And now here we are beginning to see the fruit of what those policies bring.
Yeah, it's really the fruit of that attack on meritocracy, right? You don't want to have the best and the brightest, and the whole DEI agenda now actually being worked out in front of our eyes. The lady that's in charge of making sure the water's in those fire hydrants paid $750,000 a year, and there's no water there. It is absolutely insane. 95% of the water of California being flushed out into the ocean. It is a deliberate manifestation of incompetence at the highest level. Well, let me ask you this. They both mentioned the ideology of the day. When you think about the New Green Deal and how everyone's always emphasizing we got to save the earth, isn't this just a modern form of pantheism? What is pantheism?
Pantheism comes from two Greek words, theism, which we know is God, and then pan, meaning all. So for a pantheist, they're going to see the entire universe, anything that is created, as being a part of God. God is a collective. God is not a singular individual, a singular being that has personality, but every part of the universe, every little bit as a total makes up God. So in their views, this is why they could say we're God, because we're part of that. But in reality, what it does is it takes the focus off of an individual being who's holy and righteous and a creator, a self-existent being, and then it puts it on everything. And so in one sense, it's just like Romans 1, that they worshiped the creation rather than the creator as an individual. So this is what we're seeing when you come into the Green New Deal and all that. It's even personifying Mother Earth. We talk about Mother Earth. We talk about human nature. In those regards, you have Gaia, which is, again, another philosophy where the Earth is just a mother-type figure of the whole universe, but still not sentient of its own. This leads right in. As soon as you get rid of God in the Bible and that framework, you're going to come into going, this is where karma comes in too, in that we can't violate or hurt the green or the universe, because then the universe will come back and get us. Anybody that follows pantheism realizes that it certainly has a lot of inconsistencies. But again, this is the fruit of it. As soon as you put pantheism or the worship of the green or the creation above what we understand in the biblical order, that the pinnacle of God's creative order is man and woman, male and female, and they were called to lead and to take charge over the earth. But as soon as you turn that upside down, again, the sky's the limit for the bankruptcy of these policies. So the whole green idea and what they've been doing has as its foundation this bankrupt philosophy, no doubt.
In August of 2023, we watched Hawaii burn Maui. Jan and I talked about that. You did a number of programs on that as well. And we saw there that those who were in charge of the water were encouraging people to go back to the ancestral roots of worshiping water. And to the average American, that seems strange, but this is this form of pantheism. That's the reason there wasn't water there. This whole green agenda is a form of pantheism. Your worldview matters. You know, as a pastor, for years, I've told people your worldview matters. And people kind of like roll their eyes. You've been a pastor. And you know the frustration of that. And this is just the fruit of wickedness. Let me ask you this question. We're watching these fires take place, and some have speculated the 82nd Golden Globe Awards was emceed by Nikki Glasser. That night, it was filled with blasphemy, specifically saying that the creator God has no interest in the minds of people. It was just horrible. Is it possible that these fires and the consequences that we're seeing literally across the coast with all of these massive events, is this the hand of God?
In theology, when we talk about the wrath of God, there are many nuances of that, but two of them come out here. One is the idea of God's direct hand of judgment, that they said this and God responded in a very specific judgment, like we would see in a lot of things in the Bible. But the other wrath that you see is in Romans chapter 1, again, worshiping the creation, that God gave them over, that God abandoned them because of their rejection of him. So ultimately, God will say, okay, you guys want to worship the creation? And I think God has a lot of Dr. Phil moments. How's that working out for you? We don't even need, because we can't specifically say that she said this and God did this. But what we do know is what we can say with confidence is that God has stepped back and said, okay, you guys want to reject me? We started rejecting God, certainly in the 50s and 60s, kicking him out of school, kicking the Bible out of school, prayer, etc., where that was part of our culture. So now God just says, look, you guys have, again, switched over from worshiping and acknowledging me. Now you're over here creating these DEI policies, and those are green policies, pantheistic policies, etc. And not only that, but then you mock. So again, how are your policies working out for you? And it's sad, unfortunate, because when you look at ancient Israel, there were godly people living in the land of Israel. And sadly, like Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet. Why? Because he had to watch exactly a similar situation where the leadership rejected, mocked God, worshiped other idols, and God brought judgment on them. And he was caught up into it. Were there Christians that had houses burned down? Yes. So being a Christian in a godless nation, just like ancient Israel, sometimes we still get caught up into God's judgment on it.
And that's why we're looking forward to a new heavens, new earth. We're looking to the millennial kingdom. We're looking at Jesus coming. There are better days ahead. Victor Davis Hanson from the Hoover Institute, I think, is one of the greatest minds of our day. And many of us have been saying, when you abandon God, countries look like third world nations. That worldview, when it's applied, the fruit of that will destroy a nation. Where you have Christianity and it's applied, the Protestant work ethic, you have the blessing of God. And I just want you to listen to his summary that he made this last week, and I want you to comment on that.
To finish, what we're seeing in California is a state with 40 million people. And yet the people who run it feel that it should return to a 19th century pastoral condition. They are de-civilizing the state and de-industrializing the state and de-farming the state, but they're not telling the 40 million people that their lifestyles will have to revert back to the 19th century when you had no protection from fire, you didn't have enough water in California, you didn't have enough power, you didn't pump oil. So we are deliberately making these decisions not to develop energy, not to develop a timber industry, not to protect the insurance industry, not to protect houses and property. And we're doing it in almost a purely nihilistic fashion. And Karen Bass should resign. She came to the airport back from Africa. She had nothing to say. She was confronted at the airport. Why were you in Africa? Why did you cut the fire department? They cut the fire department by almost $18 million. They gave fire protective equipment to Ukraine's first responders. And she had nothing to say. She had nothing to say because she couldn't say anything. I don't want to be too pessimistic or bleak tonight, but this is one of the most alarming symptoms of a society gone mad. And if this continues, and if this were to spread to other states, we would become a third world country if we're not in parts already.
Will we become de-civilized because of this ideology? Is that possible, Mondo?
With this ideology, I think anything is possible when we think out in the ramifications. Part of the challenge with all this is we wonder too, because we understand that ultimately the progressive left, they want to destroy the middle class. They want slaves. They want people dependent on the government. This is socialism. This isn't anything new. We can go back and read the playbooks of Karl Marx and others, but ultimately they want slaves. So the question also, we know in the global order, is you want chaos. They want things to be expensive. They want to have where people, again, are slaves and that maybe they can't drive. And this is why there's no energy, because they don't want cheap gas. They don't want people driving. Again, going back to the green worship of carbon credits. That really is the key. When you think about this philosophy, there are no limits to its foolishness, its stupidity, and also the desire for chaos. Because out of chaos, when people are desperate, people will naturally turn to anybody that will rescue them. Historically speaking, chaos brings in more government. But you think the wise person would be like, no, the government has clearly failed us here, as was just mentioned in the clip. These are complete, absolute failures. Is it incompetence or is it intentional? That's what I always wonder.
Having traveled around many parts of the world and preached the gospel, I can tell you the gospel of Jesus Christ and the word of God brings civilization out of the darkness. For 50 years now in America, that's been attacked. You're destroying their culture. I'm telling you, there's a better culture. God has something better for people. God's ways are not man's ways. God's got a better system. You're listening to Understand the Times Radio. I'm Mark Henry, filling in for Jan Markell. Today, our guest is Mondo Gonzales from Prophecy Watchers. And Monday, President Trump is going to be sworn in as the 47th president.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States
the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Well, that was January 20th, 2017, when he was sworn in as the 45th president of the United States. Monday, he's going to be sworn in as a 47th president. Mondo, many of us have been praying for President Trump for his safety. I want to ask you a question. The Bible says that God raises up kings and removes kings. Has the hand of God been in this process bringing us to this moment in history?
I think as a biblical Christian, you just, again, quoted the verse. We absolutely believe that God is sovereign over every single leader that is raised up in America for God's own reasons, which we don't always understand. But in this regard, there is reason to be hopeful because of many areas. Now, we all recognize in the history of America, every single vote that has ever been cast has always been for somebody who's imperfect because Jesus is the only perfect one. So since we're dealing in the human realm, everybody's been imperfect. People like to focus on Trump's imperfections, so be it, fine. But what we also know is that Trump's platform, his policies, absolutely are a haven, a wonder, a beauty in contrast to what we've seen the last 4 years or what would have been under a Kamala administration. Israel, even the pro-life movement, even though I understand it's not perfect, America first, jobs, again, economic prosperity. But I don't anticipate Trump to get up there and require everybody to read their Bible every day. That's never been the job of the president. But is he going to put America first? Absolutely. And is that something to be hopeful and to be thankful that God is allowing that? And also for the freedom of speech, which we know ultimately is the gospel? Of course we should rejoice.
Absolutely. And then the thought that he might be able to appoint 3 more individuals to the Supreme Court. Again, that's just the merciful hand of God, and I am just so thankful for that. Let me ask you this. What do you think his role is going to be in this next 4 years in the Middle East, and how do you see him interfacing with Israel and dealing with the problems there?
It goes on to what we've seen already, that what we have seen is that for those that study the Middle East and they understand Islamic thinking or theology, the only thing that is understood by the Islamic world is force. That's just the case. Hamas understands nothing but force. Hezbollah, we've seen that. And we've seen how whenever Israel has sought in the past to negotiate or to appease, we think about going back to World War II and Chamberlain, and we understand that you don't appease bullies. What Trump has been known for is strength. And the phraseology, which we'll probably hear more about, is security or peace through strength. And that is no better place to have that apply than in the Middle East. So I think already Trump has put it out there. People respect him when he says he's going to do something. He does it, and he's not afraid to bring that strength through.
Yeah, he's going to shake things up because he knows how to push back, whether it's China or Russia or those in the Middle East. Let me ask you this. Are we seeing the rise of the 10 kings? Recently, I heard you speak on the subject of the 10 kings in Revelation 17. Let me just read a couple of verses here. It says, "Then the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who are yet to receive a kingdom, but they received authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, that they give their power and authority to the beast."
I will order federal workers to get back to the office in person or be terminated from the job immediately. And we will create the new Department of Government Efficiency, headed by Elon Musk. And no, he's not taking the presidency. I like having smart people. You know, they're on a new kick. Russia, 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 Ukraine, 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 all the different hoaxes. And the new one is, President Trump has ceded the presidency to Elon Musk. No, that's not happening. But Elon's done an amazing job. Isn't it nice to have smart people that we can rely on? Right? Don't we want that? He's done a great job.
Mondo, you did an amazing job with this passage in Revelation 17. And my question to you is Elon Musk one of these potential 10 kings that are going to rise up in the last day?
The typical interpretation is that the 10 kings are representative of 10 regions, like the Club of Rome. I think that's traditional. Certainly that's not required from the biblical text. But my thought in my presentation was that these 10 kings very specifically, absolutely legitimately, could be called 10 influencers, 10 people who have tremendous influence. As you read in the Revelation 17 passage, they give their authority and their capabilities over to the Antichrist in that future time in order for him to fulfill his kingdom. And so the suggestion I made is, are these 10 technocrats? And no doubt, Elon Musk is probably the most well-known or the epitome of a technocrat in that regard. And so in talking about this even 2 years ago, I talked about Elon Musk. And now it seems that in one sense, he's sitting at the right hand of Trump, influencing him, just like we saw Bill Gates, another technocrat, influencing the Biden administration during COVID. These technocrats have no kingdom. The Bible says that. They have no kingdom but yet they still have tremendous influence. And could these people like Elon Musk, I think absolutely, they are the pinnacle of what one of the 10 kings are, these 10 technocrats.
Is this parallel to Daniel chapter 2 when it talks about the 10 toes?
I would say it's more in parallel to Daniel chapter 7.
Tell us about Daniel chapter 7. How does that parallel?
Well, in Daniel 2, it's talking about the toes, but Daniel 7 specifically is talking about the kings. You have these king figures, and the Antichrist rises out amongst them. And so it makes you wonder whether the Antichrist himself will be a technocrat or an oligarch to some degree, the way he comes on the scene. So I see the connection more because Revelation 17 and Daniel 7 applied a little bit more specifically to these particular figures and the way that they are involved, their companions, the way that the Aramaic works there in Daniel 7.
I was blown away when you pointed out it says that these 10 kings, they give their power and authority to the beast, the Antichrist. You think about the power that Elon Musk has just with his satellites. That is a power any country would love to have. Or you think about Bill Gates, he's starting 2 nuclear electric plants. Again, something that every nation would love to have. That's a whole nother discussion. But your point is well taken. These guys have tremendous money, power, and influence that anyone in authority would love to have to control the world. Having said that, let's think about the Middle East for just a moment. You spent a lot of time in Israel. You've studied over there. God has a plan for ethnic Israel. And Mark Hitchcock made some interesting observations about Israel, about Iran, and Turkey.
Barring some very unusual event, I believe 2025 will be a year of increased strength and momentum for Israel. The enemies of Israel are all on the run. And this is unlike anything in Israel's modern history. Iran's far-reaching tentacles have been cut. Iran is isolated and desperate, and Israel now is emboldened and energized. And emboldened Israel may even do what they've wanted to do for many years, that is knock out Iran's nuclear sites. CNN has a headline that says, Israel strikes Syria 480 times and seizes territory as Netanyahu pledges to change the face of the Middle East. The collapse of the Assad regime has allowed Israel to go in and hit Syria, again at the time when I'm making this video, 480 times. They're knocking out strategic weapons stockpiles, places where they believe chemical weapons are, destroying air assets. And Benjamin Netanyahu has called this a dramatic new chapter. He said the collapse of the Syrian regime is a direct result of the severe blows we struck Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. He says the axis has not yet disappeared, but as I promised, we're changing the face of the Middle East. And I believe this stunning change will continue. The Times of Israel has a headline that says the IDF sees chance for strikes on Iran nuclear sites after knocking out Syria air defenses.
As a student of history and military history specifically, I am literally numb as I've watched 2024 unfold. You think about, as the year started last year, the reality that the world is facing this real existential threat of Iran having a nuclear weapon, and it's like no one was going to be able to stop that. And here we are with their whole aerial defense system totally dismantled, and Israel can literally do anything they want. I almost feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, Mondo, I feel like this is the hand of God, like something we would read in the Old Testament where the enemies were just blown away, and it was totally unexpected. It was totally like out of the norm. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's nothing that Israel does that's not in the overall sovereignty and providence of God. It reminds me, again, going back to Ezekiel 37, the dry bones vision about God bringing them to life. And it's very clear that when they come back, they become, verse 10, an exceedingly great army, a force, a very specific force, a very great force in Hebrew. What we've been seeing is, no doubt, that is fulfilled right now. But everything that's happening as it relates to the expansion and the buffer zones is going to create this hatred even more so. What has it done? It's shown Iran that it cannot beat Israel conventionally. And they've already responded to increasing their nuclear program, etc. And that's ultimately what's on the table, which is going to bring in Turkey. The other thing, too, is Turkey now is taking a role in Syria far greater now that the vacuum's there. Iran is gone. Turkey's Sunni. Iran is Shiite. Turkey is central in Ezekiel 38. So all of this is coming together. As Mark just said, 2025 is going to be absolutely incredible to see Ezekiel 37, 38, and 39 move forward.
Those of us who have studied Ezekiel 38 and the Gog-Magog war, we know that Persia, Iran, has a huge role in that. And so we kind of always assume that's why they're so strong. And yet we see them being neutralized in many ways. Doesn't mean that they're not still going to attack, doesn't mean they're not going to still be involved in that. But we're seeing Turkey take a whole new role of leadership there in the Middle East. Is this the revived Ottoman Empire?
That is exactly what Erdogan has said. And scholars who will look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, you look at the house of Dagarma, most of the names there, you have Rosh, you have the land of the north, Magog, and you have Persia. But more of the figures align with Turkey. If you look at a percentage of all the names listed there, the bigger percentage refers to Turkey, which shows their greater influence. He has said quite clearly, his desire is to retake Jerusalem. His desire is to re-glorify the Ottoman Empire. And he wants to be seen as the main caliph in the Fertile Crescent Caliphate, going from Turkey all the way down into Saudi Arabia.
We can be assured of this, that whatever happens, friends, in the Middle East, Israel is going to be standing at the end. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu said something so profound in his speech not long ago to that very end. Listen to this.
King David established our capital 3,000 years ago. In Jerusalem, King Solomon built our temple, which stood for many centuries. In Jerusalem, Jewish exiles from Babylon rebuilt the temple, which stood for many more centuries. In Jerusalem, the Maccabees rededicated that temple and restored Jewish sovereignty in this land. And it was here in Jerusalem, some 2,000 years later, that the soldiers of Israel spoke three immortal words: Ha Abayit Biadenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. Words that lifted the spirit of the entire nation. We are in Jerusalem and we are here to stay.
Israel is here to stay. Mondo, thank you for being with us today.
Great to be here, Mark.